Hey, good afternoon, founders. This is Connor Kaysen, joined with my friend Nick Hughes. This is Straight Up Startups on Tuesday, September 27th. We're starting a little early today because Nick and I, have plenty of things going on. But Nick, how you doing today?
Hey Connor, I'm doing really well. Doing really well.
Awesome. In the essence of time, let's just jump right in because I know we got to get this finished here. But today we got lots of different things on the list. We're going to be talking about something called pain letters, talking about preventing burnout, which is a continuation of our conversation how we ended last week. And we have a couple different lists from some different writers about entrepreneurship and different tips for people that we're going to discuss. So first is an article that was posted on Forbes, and what it's talking about is pain letters versus cover letters. It's this unique type of letter that Liz Ryan, the contributor, has been talking about. And we've all been through it. We've all submitted so many resumes and sent cover letters, and it just gets put in the mysterious beyond, this dark pit of resumes. And sometimes it's really hard to reach out to these businesses to get them to even talk to you. And so Liz is talking about pain letters, which is kind of doing more research on the company and finding out where some of their unique pains are and trying to directly reach out to the hiring manager, the HR manager, whoever it is that has that pain point, and trying to address that point and how you can solve it. And so, Nick, my first question here for you is just, what do you think about this? Have you experienced the cover letter mayhem? And do you think pain letters and writing this letter is option for any person who's looking for a job?
Yeah, I think this is a great idea in the sense that there is a huge problem. This is a result of a problem that's been created recently, in the last 10, 20 years that hiring the whole process is totally messed up. The application process, and then when you look at things went online, now you just submit your resume here, and all of a sudden they're getting literally hundreds of kind of crappy, let's just call them what it is, mostly they're not high quality resumes and or cover letters, in the end, candidates, right? So the fact that I like the idea that this is an activity that if some proactive person takes, it shows instantly you rise to the top, because what you're doing is you're not writing a cover letter that says, I am Nick and this is and all of a sudden you're talking about yourself. The point of pain letters is to identify the company, know their business, know the pain points that they solve, and then you write this letter that illustrates how you can actually help solve that pain point. And so I think what I like about the exercise is it makes the person study the business, study the market, understand the value proposition, and then, oh, by the way, say, hey, I'm great at this, I can solve the pain. And you send it to the hiring manager, and that's where you do some digging, you find out who it is. And the coolest thing is it really does make you stand out from the crowd. And so if I was a hiring manager or a CEO and this thing landed in my email box or on my desk, absolutely, I would say I got to get this person in right now. So I think it's a great idea. It does show that there's a huge problem in our entire employment industry, that it's just like too much coming into the channel. So it's crazy.
Yeah, and I've had plenty of experiences. I know exactly what that dark hole of resumes. I mean, obviously they're not paper resumes so much anymore. It's just an unlimited folder in alphabetical order forever, which means nothing anymore. And I've been there. I know exactly what that's like to be overwhelmed. And then you have this giant list of resumes, and then you're putting out a new job post, and you don't even really have the resource to go back into the old resumes and look at old people. Like maybe by off chance, someone recent stuck in your mind, you're like, oh yeah, I can go and find that person. But most likely you're like, I'm going to put this online, and I'm going to get 100 more applications today or this week, and we'll just go through them. So that kind of never ending rotating door of resumes is really hard to get over. So I really like this concept of pain letters because it takes all of the core points of a cover letter, but it does make it a little bit more obtainable, which I like. I think people are really turned off by covers. I'm really turned off by cover letters. And if I see an employer wants one, I'm actually less likely to send my resume in. I know I've experienced that before.
Yeah, I agree. And just to jump in here real quick, I think the question to ask you is whether it's in your life recently or how many jobs now do you see that are actually filled by some random person reaching out to the random company and then getting a response back and then getting an interview and then getting a job?
Yeah, if you put your resume, like if you find the job posting online and you put your resume out there, I mean, it's like 1%
Yeah.
response rate. It's very, very low, especially if it's one of these high profile jobs. I mean, the jobs that I have done a lot of research on between my girlfriend and I are remote work jobs. And I mean, they get thousands. There's only a couple sites that are exclusive to remote work jobs, and there's lots of people watching them every day because those are highly coveted jobs. That provide a lot of work-life balance for people, which are great. But thousands of people send the resume and they actually overload some of these companies sometimes, and it can be very overwhelming. But yeah, the cover letter is just a bunch of bull. Like and these are things that I always when I help people or coach people on the resume, like take out the objective. You know, I'm a high level working, goal oriented, driven manager. Like that's just fluff. It means nothing. It's not helping anyone. No one even reads it. And the same thing for cover letters. It's been created in a way that it's just fluff and it's not providing any information.
Yeah.
So actually being proactive to write a letter to a manager, there might not even be a job open. This is the proactivity that I really like. Is a lot of times this could just make you a really unique connection, which is a better opportunity for you when it comes to looking in the job market, because like 80% of jobs come from referrals, or some type of internal connection you have. So you really got to take advantage. So if you reach out to a manager, they might not have a position, but you will stick out above all else by doing something like this, and they might give you another shot or give you a referral, or you're just going to stick out in their mind. So if they do have an opportunity, they might reach back out to you.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I maybe for another topic for another week, really talking about how to get to the point where you have people that are through your network that you're able to find a job through them.
Yeah,
because that's what I would say is how you find a job, not submit through the website and pray for the best. But hey, we're going to move on. So next topic, this was actually through WeWork and their network and their creator network. Actually, there's a blog post written on preventing burnout and basically how entrepreneurs can go about. What are some ideas around how to actually prevent burnout? So Connor, I'll throw it to you. Reading this article, what stood out to you, and what are some ideas that you might employ that really help you get away from that whole burnout feeling?
Yeah, so I really like this. I didn't know WeWork even had their own blog, but they have such an access to all these experiences, all these different founders, all these different engineers, and people working on all these things. I'm really excited to see that they're kind of trying to tell everyone's story and get all that feedback, just because they are a giant think tank. And the things that I liked in the article specifically, and then I'll jump into what I do personally. And something that I can relate to from one of my bosses is the first one from Barnaby Lashbrook, who works at Time. He doesn't answer every phone call. And I actually have a boss who very early on when I started working there, that was something that he was adamant about. If we were in a meeting, even though he's the CEO and he's got some crazy things going on, he was very set on like, I'm not going to answer my phone because I'm spending my time with you. And that really struck a chord with me early on, and was a great leadership principle that I learned from him that just kind of showed like, hey, I care about you. This is our time. It's scheduled. You have my time. And it kind of shows like this is where the priorities are, right? So it shows to me like I need to get everything out now because this is our set time, but it's also just very respectful to the person saying that I'm going to focus on you. I think everyone should do that when you're in a meeting with someone. Obviously, emergencies come up, but it's really important. I think having the smartwatch has been great because I don't have to look at my phone. People catch the phone look, but when you look at the watch, you can kind of be a little bit more subtle about it, which is nice. But specifically, what I do, and it's related to another thing. I mean, I love switching up the scenery. I do it in my apartment every now and then. I move around the couches, move around my bed, kind of different positions, just so it's fresh and it's new and kind of has some exciting and you don't get stuck in that stale routine all the time. It just stays fresh. I think switching it up, moving your desk around, sitting next to new people, something I do. I walk to work all the time. I live in Queen Anne, walk to Pioneer Square. It's like a 45-minute walk. I try to walk different ways all the time. So I cut down different alleys. I mean, I have to go from 1st to 5th. and all the way down, and I can crisscross on different streets. It really helps kind of see new places, discover new things, get new energy, get new life. I think switching it up on a daily or weekly basis is really important.
Those are great, and in fact, those you stole mine, bro. But I'm going to take another angle here. So in addition to those, the ones that stood out in this article for me was, so one of them was don't sacrifice your personal time. And, we've talked about this before, but just really being firm on the hours that you work and the hours that you don't. And it's totally okay to not work. And I know as founders and people that work hard, and we have a hard time stepping back. And, last night, man, I'm sitting on the couch and I finally put things away. And I watched the Mariners win in 11 innings, which was awesome. And, it's just like, kick back. And those hours that you're spending personal time are recharging you so that the next day you can jump back into things and be effective. So I've been paying more attention to my personal time in the last year or so than I have in a long time. And then the other thing is, the one that jumped out was exercise. I'm a big proponent of this, but the more you exercise, the more energy you feel you actually put back in your body as recovery, and you just feel good, right? So for me personally, I would say those two things, in addition to the ones that you talked about, really help me really deal with, or at least put down, the issues of burnout. And I'm pretty good at if you consider it like a marathon, I'm pretty good at that long distance run. But you have to put in there, some breaks. You just got to. And so don't sacrifice personal time. Get your exercise that basically keeps your health in, nutrition, health, and just really just your deep down, your ability to have stamina. There's that word that, by the way, did you see that last night?
Oh yeah.
Stamina. Anyway, you have stamina, right? Like that's what it takes to be an entrepreneur. So yeah, those are things that I feel were jumped out at me for sure.
Yeah, and I think this topic keeps coming up, and I wanted to bring it up because last week we ended on specifically suicide, and how important it is to get the separation. And so I think it's something that continually needs to be talked about, and something that you need to think about when you're a founder and entrepreneur. I mean, anyone that's an employee that's working hard, is you really need to find that time to separate, and unplug, get off the email, and really find some time to recharge so you can do your job better. Because if you can't do that, then you really are going to lose some of your productivity.
Absolutely.
But next is a post from a blogger that I follow pretty heavily now. His name's John Westenberg, and he posts almost every day on Medium. And he's a chief marketing officer for a couple different companies. He works remotely. He's doing the speedlancer.com thing. He pretty much documents every day about different topics. I really like what he has to contribute. I highly suggest looking at him. But this last week he posted, what is the best advice for a young first-time startup CEO, which I thought was appeals a lot to our audience. And so a couple of things that I thought were great from him. First, he starts it off talking about determination and how that's such a big predictor of success. It's not, and I know we're going to talk about this later as well, what is going to make you successful or it's not. There's no set formula. But when it comes to the long run and having a successful life or career, and trying to make it in whatever you're trying to make it, being determined is a strong indicator that you're going to make it. The reason being is because no matter how many times you're going to fail, you're going to get back up and go for it again. And I think having that resilience is extremely important, and something that's really good to have a reminder that this is what it's all about. Is being a founder is really about the failures. It's not about the success. It's about learning from those failures and becoming better entrepreneur, a better person, better in all ways of life. And so learning to get through those failures is very important. But he also talks about how growth is a process, and those failures are very important for the process, and going through that and really reevaluating the things that you've learned and the things that you've gone through so you can make better decisions, be a better entrepreneur later. I think kind of reflecting on the process and what you're going through. I mean, they always say the ride or the journey is more important than kind of the end point. And I think that's really important here to remember. Why you chose to do this is probably not a long-term thing. If you started a company, it's something that you want to learn as much as you can, be a sponge, so you can be a better entrepreneur or person later.
Awesome. Yeah, those are fully agree. I think you picked out some great ones. I'm going to highlight, there's two here that I'm going to highlight real quick. And on this list, one of them that he mentioned was build a business, not a pitch. And man, I'll tell you, for farther I go along in this industry and just in business in general, it's one thing to create a pitch and a pitch deck, and it's one thing to actually build a business. And one of them is theoretical, and one of them actually is practical and actually done. And I mean, I'm speaking on this because it's kind of where I'm at with one of the things that I'm working on right now. And you could spend as many hours, as many days, months, and years working on a pitch deck and your pitch, which basically means, how can we make this sound good? How can this be theoretically, oh my gosh, that's an amazing idea, and wow, look at how many billions of dollars are going to make. You got to go and do it. And I think in the end, going out, spending 6 months and just grinding to get, whatever the amount of customers it is to generate, $10K a month, $50K a month, $100,000 per month, which is more than $1 million a year.
Yes.
Is so freaking valuable. And you could spend 6 months perfecting your design for this pitch deck that you're going to sit in front of investors that they're going to end up saying no, because they're going to say, where's your revenue? And so I think that's a huge one right there, is build a business. You got to have a pitch deck at some point, but don't spend so much on that. The last one, make decisions quickly. So that kind of actually falls in line, which is you got to move fast, especially if it's a tech startup and you're getting going, you have a certain amount of time. You got to just make decisions quickly, determine how you judge if it was the good or a bad decision, or if a good outcome or bad outcome, and then adjust. And you just keep iterating on that. And I've found that the quicker you make decisions, the quicker you learn the outcome of that decision, which then that affects you to make the next decision.
Yep.
And so, yeah, those were two great. I mean, this whole article, dude, you're absolutely right. He is. I mean, this article was great. I've been reading it on him as well, and I hope that he keeps pushing stuff out, because I think he's doing a good job.
Yeah, I know he has a personal goal to write every day for the entire year. It's part of his personal branding and how he's figuring it all out. And I think by putting it out there, he's really learning a lot from all the feedback that he's getting from everyone.
Totally.
And we've talked a bunch about how important writing is. The other one, kind of a shout out to Founders Live here, is talking about getting a mentor and building a support network, and how important that is. So relating back to preventing the burnout, having those people there who have been through it are really helpful, because they usually are the ones that can empathize with you and usually pick you up a little bit, right? Who can pat you on the back, say you're doing okay. It's not the end of the world. I've been there before, and relate a little bit. But I think that's a great opportunity for Founders Live to kind of provide more of a worldwide expanse to access to all these people.
Absolutely.
Especially because the whole entrepreneur thing, yes, it's the American spirit, but it as a job, as a kind of a lifestyle, is very new. Outside of Silicon Valley specifically. And so Founders Live, I think, is a great opportunity for people to go and connect with other founders, entrepreneurs, get feedback, learn how other people are doing, so they can be better. And I think Founders Live is a great opportunity for that.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree. That's why we started it.
Yes. So I think I messed up the order a little bit, but I'll jump into this next one. The next article comes from my favorite blog, the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. And he met with Peter Diamandis, who's a pretty big influencer, entrepreneur. He is really big into space travel right now. And so he's the CEO of what's called the X Prize Foundation, which is for private space flight, more or less. And so he has a book where he has I believe it's 28 of his biggest lessons that he calls his Peter Laws. And so in this post, he talks about his 9 most important ones. And so, Nick, I wanted to know, what did you think was the rule that stuck out most for you that any of the entrepreneurs listening can learn from?
Yeah, it was rule number 5, and that says the best way to predict the future is to create it yourself, and
Yes.
that's about the most truthliness thing I've ever heard, if that's a word. And look, that's the, I come back to the statement quite often, but Steve Jobs once said, he's like, hey, look around. Everything that you see was created by someone. Like they had a
Yes.
vision. That's the chair, the table, the screen that you're looking at. That it was manifested as a vision from someone. They envisioned that. They created it. And so, this guy, clearly, if you do any research on Peter, he definitely is one of the visionaries and the leaders of our generation, and he absolutely nails it when it's, look, best way to predict the future is to create it yourself, which means if you have a unique idea for your startup or your company, create it.
Yeah.
You have any, like your life, if you want a better life, do it, create it. And that really, I think I kind of knew that early on, but in the last couple of years, I've totally embraced that you can't wait around. You go create your future. And by the way, if you somehow timing and things hit right, you're going to create a great future for everyone else. So yeah, that one really stuck with me.
Yeah, and I know timing's something we're going to talk about here in a little bit, and kind of related also with that transition. His last rule, rule number 9, is the world's most precious resource is the passionate mind, which a lot of people will argue kind of where's the value to that and how can you benefit, and you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket with your passion, but having both the determination from earlier and that passion is really going to help you kind of level yourself up on top of having the resources, whether it's capital or talent or everything. Kind of being excited is really going to give you somewhat of an advantage. But the one that really took me by the most surprise was rule number 6: an expert opinion is not the final word. And I know this is something that's really difficult to deal with, especially if you have any type of funding and you have investors and backers and a board. Everyone's got an opinion. We know talk is cheap. But sometimes you're going to have people who are influencers, who are experiencing your field, who are, true experts. But just because they're an expert doesn't mean that the advice they give you is the best advice for you. You want to take that advice, try to think about it a little bit more, but make sure you make the right decision. But I really like this point that just because they're an expert now might actually be harmful for you. Because sometimes if they're the expert now, then they're worried about not being the expert tomorrow. So they could be possibly in a position where if you are successful, you're going to make them not the expert anymore, and maybe you're going to become the expert, or someone else is going to become the expert. So being conscious of how those decisions are made, and just because they're an expert now doesn't mean they're going to be an expert when you're getting ready to scale or when your company's successful, or whatever decision that you're in. I thought that was a really useful piece of info.
No, totally. I always take experts as, or just that term, so loosely anyway.
Yeah.
And, dude, we're in the age of disruption, transformation, whatever you want to call it. Things are moving really fast, and anyone that says I'm an expert in this, or if you have someone that would be looked at as an expert, you acknowledge their perspective, you acknowledge their information, but look, the CEO of Marriott or Stanwood or whatever the large
hospital.
Starwood, which just merged, I think, with Marriott. But
yep.
Think about 7, 8, 9 years ago. You think that they would have believed and said, oh yeah, staying in people's homes and renting out your apartments or your home would be worldwide trend of multi-billions of dollars? No, they wouldn't. Not because it is against their business model, but they are experts who would have said, of course not. Why would anyone do that?
Yeah.
And I just, I always think about that, and you have to consider the source and understand the predispositions of where they're coming from. At the same time, respect that they've been in the industry for 10, 20, 30 years, so that is a value, but 100%. Hey, we're going to move on, though. Let's move on. Interesting concept that we're transitioning to, which is This actually was a Founders Live post that we posted that actually came from eMarketer, but they did a study, and they're just illustrating how much harder it is to break out as an app today, and it is absolutely harder. And I guess I'll throw the question to you: why do you think it's so hard now to break out if you're building, quote, a native app on the App Store or Google Play? Why is it so hard now?
Well, after I read this, I went on to the Google store just to see like what are the top apps right now, and it's just like it's all Facebook, right? Facebook just dominates it, and Google dominates it, right? Because they have the resources, they have the network. They can, I mean, Allo by Google came out last week, and they get 10 million downloads just because they launched, and there's so much news coverage of it. It's really hard to compete with that when you're on, you're a normal startup with a consumer app. But the times are really interesting because our culture has so much ADD, right? It's the 15 minutes of fame has never been bigger, right? Because and the 15 minutes is shorter than ever. But now you can trend on Product Hunt and get a couple thousand hits in a day, and then you're done. And it's even at a smaller scale where you're like your virality can get up there, and it can get you some hits, and that could help if you have the right business to get some of those repeat people. But it happens really quick, and if you don't take advantage of it, it's really hard. But consumers, one thing I think there's not a lot of like utility apps out there. It's a lot of game like concepts. Not a lot of things people are building that are true businesses that are making people's lives better. I mean, that's why the Ubers and the Airbnbs are so big, because those are they have a lot of value to people multiple times. And maybe Airbnb, you're not going to it every day or every week or every month, but you will come back to it, especially if you have a good experience and they're kind of getting in there. Uber, obviously, all those. I mean, I have Airbnb, Car2Go, Lyft. I have them all on my app, and I go through whatever's going to be most convenient for my spot. But yeah, I think not a lot of people are building businesses and apps that are truly valuable and useful. And so it'll be interesting to see. This article kind of points like, is there even a future with the whole app concept? There is, but what's it going to turn into? Is it just going to be like a monopoly based off these big tech companies? I'm not really sure. But yeah, it's really hard to market your app. But I think the biggest problem is people really aren't building things that have a lot of use. I think the trend of like, it's so cool now to have your tech startup and build the Uber for burritos or whatever you want it to be, that there's just a lot of junk coming out there.
Oh yeah, and so I was actually on a podcast recently, the startup sessions with Michael Naus, and I actually touched on this concept, which I wrapped it into this explanation, which is, it's basically a war for attention. Essentially, we have 24 hours a day of attention, and that's finite, okay? And so as a business, and maybe it's consumer-oriented focused, but regardless, as a business, you are putting something out there that in the end you have to get attention from someone to use your thing to make money in some way. Like, that is a very simplistic way to describe that. It's just so crowded now, and there's so many things out there. We have a finite amount of attention. So how do you break into it? And my answer, it's not easy, but my answer was there has to be somewhat of ingenuity to what you do and what you're rolling out, like uniqueness. It's like, I can't find this anywhere else. The stakes to succeed in rolling out a new technology or a new app today are so high. And so the problem is there's just millions of apps on there that don't do shit.
Yeah.
There is the top 10 to 25 are all big conglomerates, basically. So if you're going to roll out a new experience, you have to, one, hit an genuine type of idea that no one is really doing yet, or no one has done. Two, you have to have, I think, clearly it can't just be an app. It has to be your plan, your entire model has to hit not only a native experience, but I think it should be accessed via the web. It should be accessed via maybe even messaging or through a bot or whatever, where there's touch points in all these various areas of a consumer experience. It can't just be, hey, we just released an app and hope to God that we get found. Like, you're done. So it's just so much harder now, and it's just because there's so much noise out there. So yeah, I totally agree with this this study. I agree with. I'm not sure is it kind of doomsday? Is it over? I think it's just business and the models that are going to be successful are changing. I don't have the answers for sure, but I think you're faulty if you think you're just going to roll out an app and just get discovered. And I mean, that's what we're doing with Calling It, like really thinking about how do we hit these touch points, whether it's actually in Messenger, it might be a bot experience or somewhat of a kind of automated. How do we hit the native app experience that you can download on the Apple, the store or the Google Play Store? How can you access it just at a domain name, URL? These are the things that I think it's gone full circle, and you can't just roll out an app now. It has to actually be accessed through all these platforms.
Yeah.
That's what I mean, there's so much to this answer, but you gotta have a holistic view on things.
Totally. And I think even with Product Hunt out there, and there is a lot of opportunity still for discovery that's out there. It's still really hard to find new things that are coming out. Product Hunt really is the only thing that's out there that is like, hey, here's a new product that we're launching. You got to go find it. And they do an incredible job. Great platform. Nothing bad to say against them. But I do think there's more opportunity because there is so much coming out that maybe there's other places that you can get out there. I don't know what that is, but if someone out there listening has an idea, we'd love to hear it. But cool. So the next topic comes from Greg Pollock, who posted this directly on Founders Live, I believe. And Nick, I actually want to kick this to you because I think you're more experienced. But what Greg does is he's providing opportunity, talking about the only fair way to do startup equity. So Nick, you want to give us a little rundown about what he says as well as what you think, and then I'll give you my opinion about his system in equity, providing equity to people at different periods.
Right. First of all, it's a challenging topic, or it's a challenging issue all around. When you start a company, you're talking to your co-founder, and you're basically like early in the process, and you're looking over to them, and you're like, all right, how much do I own? How much do you own?
Yeah.
Like it almost is. It's like so backwards that you and your partners are determining what the ownership is when the least amount of work into the business has been done. Mm-hmm. And so with that being said, there's the common angle here is you just sit around the table, you determine who brought value, like who brought the idea, who's built any IP, what has been done up to this point, and you split it, and it's, I've said this before, but it probably should not be equal. It could be somewhat of a 55-45, 40-60. It probably should not be 50-50 for many reasons. But what he's saying is you essentially build like almost this model or an equation that is on a monthly basis. It's like it's a rolling. You start at a certain percentage, and then you kind of determine based on it's like in real time every month who is doing more work. You adjust the percentage accordingly, so that like in month 3 or month 6 or 12 months in, the percentage is shifted according to how much value someone has brought to the table, and maybe that's in time or money or whatever. And so at least a working model. And on the surface, I agree with the logic. I agree with the approach. My concern is he touches on it, which it's hard legally to kind of wrap a wrapper around it that is, because the thing is, when you incorporate a company, you kind of have docs that go stamp, here's the shares. And it's not like, technically you're granted all the shares up front, and then the company slowly buys them back to the point where there's actually zero. It's a slightly complicated process, but in simple terms, you're basically given them all, and then if you leave within a year or 2, they buy back a certain amount that you leave on the table. But the thing is, those docs are kind of stamped in time, where his suggestion is it's this really real-time working model. But how do you do that legally? How do you grant shares, and how do you grant ownership when legally for the last 100 years this is the way that we've created companies? So I think that he's onto something. I think it's going to be interesting to see how the legal system adapts to these new ways of ownership.
Yeah, and I think a lawyer is probably going to have to lead it, right? Because they're going to have to figure out some way, because you and I know when it comes to all these equity problems and any type of acquisition conversation that comes up, how expensive these lawyers and the fees add up and how quickly it adds up. And I think the convenience of just right away saying it's 50-50 or 55, you kind of, if you even have the wherewithal to do something like that, it's just like, let's just finish it and get it out of the way. And I keep going back and forth. Like it's so important that you should put the time and the money and the resources into getting it right. But a lot of times it just seems like small potatoes in the scheme of we haven't even built anything yet. So it doesn't even have value until we build something. But if you are lucky enough to build something great and you have customers and you have a big company and you're at the point where this equity even means anything, then it's one of those thoughts where, it's better in hindsight, right? Where it's kind of tough, like, oh, maybe we should have put more time and effort into this. And so, yeah, I think theoretically it's an amazing idea. But how you actually figure that out, right? Because a lot of startups you have the engineer and you have the salesperson, and there's no crossover into how do we value your contribution to the company. Because just because it's a chicken or the egg. You can't build the business if you don't have the product, but you can't build the business if you don't have the customer. And a lot of times the two co-founders handle each side. So I think it'll have to be like hey, we're going to set goals, right, for each other. And you have to hit your own milestones to obtain this amount of equity when we get to the time. I think that is going to be the direction it has to go. And it's worth any group, if it's not an individual co-founder or individual founder, to talk about and actually spend some time discussing this, because in my opinion, I think it's great. And I think there's a lot of problems that come up when people have their equity. I mean, I'm going through it with one of my companies now, right? Someone has equity and they leave and they get all the equity and they almost have nothing left to gain by staying with the company. And that kind of compromises everyone else, because now they have their equity, and if they bounce, it's up to the other people to make them the money, and it kind of just puts everyone in a tough position because they've earned it already.
Yeah, no, it's a very complicated topic. It's not something we're gonna come up with the solution right now, but it's definitely worth, as any founder should do, it's worth researching, thinking about, and you as the CEO or the co-founder of your company, you have a responsibility to figure it out and do what everyone involved agrees with. That's it. So there's no real one way. But moving on here to, interestingly, a topic that is slightly similar in the sense of, this was an article that touched on the fact of passion, right? And you hear all the time, do something you're passionate about, man. Like, you'll be successful if you work on a company and a business that it's in your passion area, you're passionate about it. And this person is posing the question, is passion actually overrated in business? And I've got my thoughts, but what do you think?
I say passion can never be overrated. Right? If your exclusive goal in life is to have $1 billion and have a bunch of billionaire friends, then that's fine. But having passions and being excited about things is what makes you human and what makes life so beautiful. And that's why I'm kind of against that it's overrated, because if you can find things, whether they're work related or not, that you are passionate about, that gets you up in the morning, gets you excited, and hopefully provides some type of living for you, then that's great. Then I'm not going to knock on that whatsoever. You go do you, have fun doing it. You only get one life. Take full advantage of it. On the other end, though, I do understand that trying to create your career out of your passion isn't always the best option. So when I was graduating high school, I chose to go to the University of Oregon, go Ducks. And the reason, almost exclusively why I chose it, is I knew they had kind of like a rising sports program at that time. Basketball was much bigger than football. And when I was there, it switched. but I knew they had a sports culture. It was a small town that didn't feel like a small town, but I knew they had one of the top sports business programs. And I know a bunch of my friends from my youth always say like, "Hey, didn't you want to be a sports announcer?" Like I was the kid like who didn't get picked on the kickball team, but would rather like announce the kickball game at lunch and pretend I was Vince Scully or something like that. And so I wanted to go there because I knew I wanted to work in sports. And we're all told, especially the new generation is all told, like, go do what you love, find your passion. I don't think that's really, I think that's a little too extreme. But really quickly I found out, oh, if I have a job in sports, that means I'm working during the games. I don't even get to watch the football or the baseball or the soccer, whatever you're in, because you're too busy working or managing the game. And so that actually turned me away, and that's when I changed some of my focus. And then I was like, I want to be a fan of sports, and I want to participate in the sports that way, but I don't want it to be my job because I like having the separation of my passion and it being my work. So there is. But if you're passionate about something and you can find a way to make a living off it, go do it. There's so many people now with the internet, webinars, blogging. There are so many ways to make at least small amounts of income by talking about and participating in your passions, that if you can find a way to make it work, please go do it.
Right. Yeah. You hit a couple major things there, and I'll jump off the other end and touch on the fact that I fully agree. I mean, if you can't, whatever you choose to do, especially if it's your own business, if you're not passionate about it, you're probably not going to enjoy it. So I think that this is not a black or white, full spectrum, 100% kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I agree that the point of this, the nuance is finding what, and he touches on it, is finding what you're great at. It's not what you're passionate about. So let's take your example. You love sports, which by the way I do too, and that's why I'm building something in the sports industry. But the general idea is sports. But what are you great at within that, and what does the business do? It could, in sports, there's so many. I mean, there's pretty much every single job within the industry of sports. And so I think what this individual is talking about is passion is a kind of like table stakes. It's a starter. It's like, look, if you're, let's call it, in sports, you could be passionate about football or basketball, but hate NASCAR. And so, you're not passionate about NASCAR, but you might be passionate about basketball. And within basketball, what are you doing? Or, it could be transportation, so someone is just so passionate about eradicating the world of cars. You look at Lyft and Uber and their visions of basically, like, I heard, the stat was crazy. I can't remember the numbers, but the amount of cars that are parked in the United States at any given time and how much space that takes up, it's like the entire Pacific Northwest is covered with cars.
Yep.
And it's their vision is to take those away, bring back the parks and the sidewalks and all that. So someone that's passionate about transportation industry, but they might not care about building a car. They might actually care about ridding the world of cars and building autonomous vehicles. So I think in the end, it's figuring out it's what you're passionate about, but then secondly, doing what you are great in the world at. And I've always focused on this, is there's certain people have certain strengths. They're just incredible, they're incredible developers, and they think that way. They can write code, or they can think mathematically. It's just amazing. And there's some people that are just great speakers or communicators or leaders in other ways, and there's people that are just incredible designers. They can design a great product. They can draw amazing. So those are the skills and talents. And so yeah, in the end, I would say, of course, figure out what you're, quote, passionate about, but follow what you seem to be great at, which, answering that question real quick, is it's what people compliment you on. It's what people say, like, hey, good job, or hey, that is awesome that you do that. And all of a sudden the world tells you that you're actually really good, or it's where you feel when you feel like the world just is working for you and there's flow and no one's stomping on you or stopping your flow. That's when you're great. That's your strength. that's what you follow. But you combine the passion with the strength, and that's where you're going to be successful.
Yeah. And I think in the podcast, you talked about that same point about finding what your strengths are, and really utilizing that as, your future career, whatever you're going to do, because that leaning on those strengths is going to get you further than anything else. And the last thing I would say about passion, and I always use the example with all the small businesses I talk to, just because you love and you're great at baking cupcakes does not mean you're going to be a good cupcake business.
Totally.
Even if you make a great product, because once you get caught up in the business, right, and you're thinking about employees and you're talking about business license and tactics and theory and all that you're not baking cupcakes anymore, you're running your business. And so that's very important to remember, that your passion sometimes goes away when you actually start a business. The other thing in the article that I want to touch on too is he talks a lot about how important timing is. And I think his point is that timing, about choosing, your market and entering at the right time. I just feel like timing, it's not something that you can control like passion. And that's why I don't think it's underrated, because timing has a lot of other outputs, where passion is very internal, and you have control about how you feel in the morning when you wake up, how you're going to be motivated, and what's going to excite you. You have those controls. Timing sometimes is affected by other things outside, and so it's tough, but he probably is right that the most successful companies are timed right. I get that. I think they weren't passionate about, getting people, Uber wasn't passionate about, transportation and everything. More so the timing and where smartphones were, and the need was really good for him to jump in.
Yeah.
But going to the last topic, it comes from a Medium article by Terry Lee, and Terry Lee is actually a Notre Dame graduate. He's the COO of MeUndies, which is, I believe, a spin-off from Dollar Shave Club. And they're really big on podcasts. That's the only place I ever see them marketed as podcasts. I think they started doing some commercials around the Super Bowl. But he wrote an article a couple of days ago called "Embracing My Imperfection," and kind of getting over being, thinking his strength was being a perfectionist. And so, Nick, tell me about some of the ways that you've embraced your imperfection and what you thought about what Terry wrote here.
Yeah, he's down the right path. I think he, just to kind of step back a little bit, anyone that's a founder, or people that I've met that are founders in especially our industry, they tend to be very high performance individuals and high thinking, very ambitious people. And it turns out that they're very hard on themselves, and they're very perfectionistic because of that, or a lot of the traits that they have. And so, including myself, there's a lot of other people that I've noticed that, they can very quickly get into a situation where it becomes challenging or very painful when you're not maybe performing at the level that you expect yourself to, which, by the way, from outside it's normal. Like you're kicking ass, you're doing well, but internally you think, oh man, like and what he actually wrote in there was the words that he was using. He's like, I need to get better, but then he's like, wait, what? Like he basically realized that he was like, there was a quality and maybe a quantity to his quality that he felt that he was being. And in the end, he realized that it's really about the journey and the experience and growth. And so the way I internalized this was I haven't wrote this exact post, but something similar. And the fact is that you get to the point where you realize, by embracing your imperfections, you actually authentically live to the point where that becomes the bliss, which is, look, we're all flawed. We all have our own bullshit. It's like, that's personally. And then in business, no one's perfect. And if you embrace that, you kind of live with this, hey, it's almost like surfing. It's like, we're in this thing, like, this huge wave might come and I can ride it, or it might not come and it's okay, but you just live in this really cool state versus always looking in the mirror thinking like, God, I've got another zit, or God, like, why am I, like, I'm not as good looking, or I'm not as big as someone else. Like, you know what I mean? Like, the moment someone feels imperfection is they're way too concerned. They're concerned about the wrong things. They're concerned about the things that they can't change. And I liked this article because it's him vocally saying it's not about that. It's about the growth and the journey and the authenticity and being myself and adding value to the world in ways that I feel like I can, in the ways that like every day I learn new things to add value. That's what it's all about. And so I like what he said. I definitely
I
like what he said.
I love what you said. It's going to stick with me of having an authentic lifestyle. I've
Mhm.
never put those two words together, but that speaks to me a lot. That's something that over the last year and a half of really has become a lot more important to me, and kind of understanding and having that introspectiveness. So Nick, did you ever watch the Tony Robbins documentary?
Not yet.
Dude, you got to watch it
Well,
because that is where this whole article stems from. And it's really impressive to see how impactful it's been on so many people. And the quote here, it's totally worth reciting, that Tony Robbins, and he has it in bold. Tony Robbins yells this in his documentary. He said, and he talks about it in Tony Robbins' podcast twice now. He says, the biggest lie we're told is that achievement is more important than fulfillment. And I think that's so true. Especially, I'm part of the trophy generation, right? That was everyone gets a trophy when you play a sport or you participate, because it's unfair that certain people get trophies and other ones don't. And it's not about the achievement of getting the trophy, right? It's the camaraderie of playing with the team, about learning about winning and losing, about learning how to communicate with other people, right? Having that fulfillment of going through the process and providing, something positive back to the world is far more important than getting the award or getting the paycheck,
right.
or getting
Well,
the recognition that my generation wants so badly. And I'm part of that, right? I'm constantly looking for feedback, the pat on my back, or doing stuff so people go, wow, you did a great job, Connor. And I know that about myself, and it's something that is ingrained in a lot of young people now. And so really thinking about, what was the impact, right? Did you make a big impact on someone else's life? Did you change a family? I think, finding that benefit in the fulfillment, so much more important than
right.
achievement. I
And
really love that
dude,
line.
I'll just step in here and I guess I'll ask you that. So this is interesting because there is some things happening that if self-selecting, if you're a founder, typically you go for achievement, like you are
Yes.
a high achiever. And so I think when you look at everyone that is kind of in this realm, they are so achievement oriented that they definitely don't or have trouble dealing with or figuring out what is fulfillment. And so when you're describing that, and by the way, like totally agree, like all those things, what is fulfillment? How do we get to the point that we can more feel fulfilled at the same time we continue down the path of achievement, and there's milestones and there's levels of quote of achievement that we can reach, but those are so diabolically opposite that
Yeah.
how can someone that is so achievement oriented reach the point where they can feel fulfilled without feeling like a failure?
Yeah, so a couple different points, and I think it comes back a little bit to the passion and kind of taking a step outside of work, right? Because sometimes, especially if you're building an app or you're building a game, you're not going to find that fulfillment, right? That's, you're trying to start a business and everything. It's not the same as like starting a nonprofit. But if you take the time outside of your work to uh, help somebody, right? Talk to someone on the bus. I talk a lot about how far a smile goes to people on the bus.
Hmm.
I've ridden the bus multiple times a day. How many trips on the bus I've been taking, going out to every neighborhood. There's days where I ride the bus 6 or 7 times, and it's always awkward. Nobody talks, but there's a lot of people that are having bad days all the time. And when you see someone smile back at you, it's awkward, but that can go a lot. That can change someone's life by simply
Hmm.
smiling at them. So providing that really can make a big difference. That's something very, very small. Volunteering is another thing, right? Go out and volunteer. There's organizations out there who need your time, right? Go and contribute at a homeless shelter, at a food bank, at a nonprofit. I know, like I'm helping out with Habitat for Humanity, and provides a little bit more fulfillment than you're doing. But I think sometimes the achievement, you can get that fulfillment from the achievement when you provide a good service to a needy individual, right? Like a lot of times I'm helping local businesses with their marketing. Yeah, I feel that achievement, but when they come or they say, like, Connor really helped me and I get a referral from them, that's when I feel fulfilled because I know I did right by that customer. And I think you can pull that fulfillment from there. But it's about finding something that's going to make other people happy, not about making yourself happy, and kind of trying to be a little bit more selfless, I think is very important. The last part, I know I'm going long here, is when you have employees, it's far easier to achieve this because they are your constituent that you need to fulfill. Unfortunately, sometimes it's patting them on the back for achievement that'll make you feel fulfilled, I think. It's very important as a leader, especially if you have millennials, to highlight their achievements because they're going to appreciate you more. And kind of how I talked about how my boss would not take phone calls during our meetings. I think he maybe seeing this, he'll feel a little bit more fulfilled that I recognize that and how impactful that was on me by him making that decision.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great thoughts, man. Great way to end today.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the week. As always, we'll see you guys next Tuesday right around the same time. Hit us up on founderslive.com. We'd love to hear your questions. Let us know what you think about our post. And yeah, keep working hard. Keep the hustle up. And we'll see you next week.
See you.